Hello, everyone. I'm here for one of my stories. This is Lindsay Dunn, and today I wanted to do a brief little movie review with you about two movies I've seen recently. I have been on vacation, guys, and so I haven't really had time. I've been catching up on movies and really haven't had time to write any reviews. And so I wanted to just put out a couple of video reviews to sort of catch up and get back into the swing of things. So I'm going to be reviewing very quickly two movies today. One is God's Country and the second is Moonage Daydream. So God's Country is put out by IFC. It is what I would call a rural noir, directed by Julian Higgins, written by Shaye Ogbonna, starring Thandiwe and Joris Jarsky and Jefferson White. So in this movie, we have three main characters. We have a woman of color who is played by Thandiwe. Her name is Sandra. She's a college professor. And there's sort of a war of escalating attrition that happens between her and these two white hunters that feel like they have every right to park on her land. They want to park on her land so they're a little bit closer to the jumping off point where they go hunting. And she sort of stakes her claim and says, you know, guys, you cannot park here because this is my property. And they don't take kindly to that. And it just starts this sort of battle of wills and a little bit of a power struggle between her and these two men. And what's interesting is it starts off where she's really just defending her property and her right to not not have anybody on here. So initially you're really behind her and you think, yeah, I understand. But as the movie goes on, it becomes something a little bit more where she's not just defending her property, but she's actually sort of the one crossing boundaries and entering their territory, not physically, but more mentally and emotionally, and is trying to insert herself and convince them that maybe what they're doing isn't exactly right. And part of the movie reveals why she's doing that and tries to make sense of her actions, because it starts to become where, I mean, you can't really, I guess when you think of a Karen, that's always, you think of a white woman that is telling, kind of inserting her nose into someone's business where she doesn't belong. And Thandiwe is almost becoming a sort of Karen, where she's not just saying, well, you can't cross the line where I am, but she starts to say, you can't cross the line or should not cross the line in these other situations too. And it escalates further into this war. Now, what I really liked about this movie overall is the tone that it sets. I really enjoy rural noir, especially the ones that are starring females, like movies like Frozen River and Winter's Bone, and these movies where you have sort of this lone female who is working against the system, these inner workings of a rural community where there's sort of a law unto itself, and the cops really aren't the rule of the land. I really like those kinds of movies. I find them very unsettling, really good at setting tone, and you're sort of going from bad to worse. Thandiwe gives a career best performance. I really enjoyed what she did with this role. And it does introduce you a little bit to the impact of Hurricane Katrina that sort of comes about roundabout in a strange way, which I won't reveal, but it is really refreshing for me when I see tragedies of things that happened brought onto the screen in the movies. That's something I really appreciate, because it helps me to kind of experience human suffering in a different way. A lot of times when things happen, tragedies like 9/11, or you hear about things like Hurricane Katrina, a lot of times that suffering and that painful situation feels very removed from where you are. You see it in the news and you hear about it, but you don't really get to see the impact it has in someone's life. And so when you're able to do that in a movie or television show, it really impacts me, and it helps me become more aware of what this really means, what this tragedy really means. And it engaged me enough that I actually started watching the Apple TV series 5 Days in Memorial, which is a movie or a TV series that I was planning on watching, but I just hadn't dove into it. And seeing the impact of Katrina, even in this little bit in this woman's life, made me want to get in more into this history. And so it impacted me, not just in this movie, but even impacted what I watched next. So I really recommend this movie. It has not gotten a lot of attention, but I think it was really well done. It's definitely a hidden gem to me. I know it was seen at some film festivals, but now that it's hit theaters, I don't think people have really talked it up much. And it does have some really nice moments of spiritual impact where the woman goes into a church and she's trying to understand one of the people that is coming against her. She sort of is trying to understand who he is and his perspective and find out more about him. And it's a really complicated, interesting conversation that happens. So this movie was surprising also in that you kind of thought one set of things was going to happen, and then it constantly surprises you. And you kind of like, oh, this is going to go bad right now. But Thandie Newton, repeatedly, she sort of avoids the big escalation. She's not afraid to push the envelope, but she does try to keep things fair and to keep them from going past the breaking point. And she shows a lot of self-control and empathy in how she deals with these people. So I really recommend that. God's Country. I think maybe it has left theaters at this point, but it would definitely be something worth a rental. And I don't think it'll get any attention during award season, but it's definitely really well done. The score is fantastic also, and you guys know that is really important to me. And also it's set in beautiful Montana, so you have some gorgeous set pieces. The second movie I want to talk about is a musical documentary that is Moonage Daydream, the David Bowie musical documentary. It is directed by Brett Morgen. It is a Neon movie, so it's being distributed by Neon. And I chose to see this because I have family members that really like David Bowie, and I also really enjoy biopics and biographical documentaries about musicians. The Leonard Cohen Hallelujah movie was excellent, and so I was hoping for the same from this David Bowie biopic, but I have to tell you, this did not work for me. First of all, it was almost 2.5 hours long, and it wasn't really, when I come out of either a biopic or a biographical documentary about a musician, what I kind of want to get out of it is I want to understand this person better. Not necessarily, I do hope to learn something about their life, about their process, about their work, about their artistry, but I also kind of want to understand them better and get into their head a little bit. And I came out of this movie, unfortunately, not understanding David Bowie any more than I really did before. It was more like a David Bowie experience than a documentary or a biography. There was no storyline, there was no through line that kept you going. Referring back to the Leonard Cohen Hallelujah, there was sort of this understanding Leonard Cohen through his process in writing the song Hallelujah, and then all of the covers and manifestations for that song that have come after. So that really set what they were going to talk about. It helps make sense of all the content, because when you're looking at a person's life, you have to decide, what you're going to include and what you're not going to include, therefore. And with this David Bowie movie, Moonage Daydream, it honestly felt like somebody just took random snippets and they shook them up in like a boggle container and then threw them on the table and said, all right, what do we have? Because there were, so you have footage from his concerts, you have recordings of him talking about his art, about his thought process, you have his live interviews footage, and you get to see some of the really bad interviews he went through and some of the better ones. And you see an evolution from his young self to his older self, but that was not consistent. Sometimes you jump from young David Bowie to an older David Bowie. You would have thought, okay, well, maybe they're going to show like him in his 20s and then him in his 30s and his 40s, but they kind of jumped around a lot, and there was certain pieces, there were certain scenes that they showed over and over again, and that works sometimes. Like, you might say, okay, we're going to show you this scene at the beginning, and then but it doesn't quite make sense, and so we're going to repeat that. Now that you've learned all this stuff, we're going to show it again, and now you'll make better sense of it. But it wasn't like that at all, because it had completely different dialogue, and there were just certain scenes that they kept showing over and over again. And there was no chronology, there was no timeline, so it wasn't clear exactly what they were trying to do. It was also, as I've already said, really long. I think if they had trimmed an hour from this movie, it would have been much more compelling. We did have songs, David Bowie songs, and you got to see a lot of live performances, so that was great. But, as being a movie person, and they showed some footage from his movies, which I appreciated, and I kind of want to see some of his movies now, but they showed maybe 2 seconds of him in The Labyrinth. They showed no scenes of him in Fire Walk with Me, which are two of the things I know David Bowie best from. So it was just kind of a jumble, kind of a mess. It had a lot of flashing lights. I actually got a headache from all the flashing lights, which I don't do. Normally that doesn't happen to me. So it just was a lot, and didn't make much sense. So I think I would give this one a pass, personally, unless you really, David Bowie is your person, and you like, he's one of your favorite musicians. I will always see every, Leonard Cohen or anything about the Beatles. I'll just watch those because I'm fascinated by those people. So if you really, really love David Bowie, then this is for you. But everyone else, I think you can give it a pass. You don't really learn anything. You don't, you get to see footage, lots of footage with him in it. And that way you gain some knowledge, but I'm sure there are other biographies. Now, one thing that's notable about this movie is, as I understand it, it is the first film that has ever been approved by the David Bowie estate. So maybe it's in keeping with what he would have wanted. Maybe David Bowie doesn't want anyone to understand him. It certainly feels that way, even when you watch the interviews. People, I mean, there were the interviews where the person was being really insulting in the way that they would interview them. And so I was totally in favor of him evading those people. But part of his shtick, was all of these identities that he put on. So maybe at the end of the day, and he admits later on that he did that, and that he was it was his way of keeping people at bay and not really showing anybody who the real David Bowie was. So maybe at the end of the day, if this is the first movie that was approved by them, maybe they don't want that mystery solved. Maybe they don't want people to be able to get a hold of that to grasp in their hands. And if that's the case, fine, but it's not for me. Um, so that was my experience watching Moonage Daydream. Am I sorry I watched it? No, I can't say that. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, I got to see this and I got to experience it and see if it worked to be able to pass on that knowledge to you. Yeah, I think it was not a well done documentary about somebody, and I would try to, I would try to find something else. If somebody said, I want to, could you help recommend a movie for me about David Bowie? I probably wouldn't pick this one. I would find out what else is out there or look forward to that being made one day. So that is my review of both God's Country and Moonage Daydream. Did you watch either one of these? I'd love to know what you thought. You could share it in the comments or let me know if there's a movie you want me to review, and maybe I'll go see it. I see a lot of movies, so let me know what you would like to see me talk about. So that's all for this episode of One of My Stories, and see y'all later. Bye.